I would write, usually, I couldn't write when I was doing Blue Bloods. I just don't work that way. So I commute from LA to.
Tom Selleck is one of those rare television stars who has managed to remain both relevant and respected across decades. From his breakout role in Magnum P.I. during the 1980s to his long-running success on Blue Bloods, Selleck has become a household name, a figure of strength, warmth, and old-fashioned charm. But even legends like Tom Selleck have their own heroes, and for him, one man stood taller than the rest, James Garner. James Garner was already a Hollywood icon by the time Selleck was struggling to land roles. Known for Maverick in the 1950s and the Rockford Files in the 1970s, Garner brought something special to the screen. He wasn't just a leading man, he was relatable, funny, and authentic. He played characters with flaws, humor, and humanity, and audiences loved him for it. For decades, Selleck spoke only briefly about Garner. He admired him, paid tribute when Garner passed away in 2014, but never shared the full extent of their bond. Now, at 80 years old, Selleck has finally broken his silence. In his memoir and recent interviews, he's revealed details about Garner's influence on his career and life, not just as a fellow actor, but as a mentor and friend whose example shaped him more than most people ever knew. This is Tom Selleck's untold story about James Garner. A story of respect, lessons, and a friendship that has lasted far beyond Hollywood. Tom Selleck's path to stardom was anything but smooth. Today, people look at him as a natural-born television star. But in the late 1960s and early 1970s, he was just another hopeful actor struggling to make his mark. He did modeling jobs, appeared in small commercials, and occasionally got uncredited roles in films. Casting directors often told him he was too tall, or that his rugged looks made him harder to place in typical television roles of the time. For years, he scraped by, waiting for the opportunity that might finally open the door. During this same period, James Garner was already a giant in the industry. He had become a household name with Maverick, playing the charming gambler Brett Maverick in the late 1950s. And then cemented his legacy in the 1970s with the Rockford Files. Garner's characters were different from the typical Hollywood hero. They weren't invincible or larger-than-life, they were witty, vulnerable, sometimes unlucky, but always engaging. To a young Selleck, Garner embodied everything an actor should strive for. What impressed Selleck most was Garner's naturalness. On screen, he never looked like he was acting. He simply became the character, delivering humor, frustration, or emotion with an ease that drew audiences in. Selleck later admitted that watching Garner taught him more about acting than any formal class ever could. Garner didn't overplay his roles, and he never tried to dominate a scene unnecessarily. He trusted the story and let his honesty as a performer carry the moment. When Selleck finally had the chance to meet Garner in person, it wasn't in a glamorous Hollywood setting, but through the natural overlaps of working in the same industry. Selleck was nervous, expecting to feel intimidated by the presence of a man he had admired for years. But what struck him immediately wasn't Garner's fame, it was his humility. Garner treated everyone, from producers to crew members, with the same respect. He didn't put on airs, and he certainly didn't behave like someone who saw himself above others. That first meeting left a mark on Selleck. Here was a man who had every reason to act like a star, but chose instead to be approachable, kind, and real. Garner cracked jokes, made people feel comfortable, and carried himself with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. For Selleck, who was still shaping his own identity as an actor, this was a revelation. It showed him that success in Hollywood didn't have to mean arrogance. You could be both respected and humble. Selleck would later recall how these early encounters shaped the foundation of his career. He realized that Garner's secret wasn't just talent, it was authenticity. Audiences loved him because he was believable. Fellow actors admired him because he was professional without being self-important. And the crews adored him because he treated them as equals. In those moments, Selleck began to form his own philosophy. He didn't want to be just another leading man who posed in front of the camera. He wanted to bring a sense of humanity to his roles, to play characters who were likable, flawed, and real. When Magnum P.I. finally came along, Selleck leaned on the lessons he had learned by watching Garner. Magnum wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, got outsmarted, and often relied on friends for help. That relatability was one of the reasons viewers connected with him so deeply. Looking back now, Selleck admits that his admiration for Garner was never about idolizing him from a distance. It was about learning how to carry himself both as an actor and as a man. That first meeting wasn't the start of a casual acquaintance. It was the beginning of a mentorship that would quietly influence Selleck for the rest of his life. T.S. James. Garner's career wasn't just about the characters he played. It was about the values he represented. To Tom Selleck, this was where the true lessons lay. Garner didn't just shape his acting style, he set an example of how to navigate Hollywood without losing your sense of self. One of the first things Selleck noticed about Garner was his unique approach to performance. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't theatrical, and he wasn't trying to show audiences how talented he was. Garner once said, "I'm a Spencer Tracy-type actor. Never the same, always myself." That philosophy resonated deeply with Selleck. Garner believed that honesty was the core of good acting. If you could make the audience believe you, the job was done. This idea stuck with Selleck when he finally stepped into leading roles. As Thomas Magnum, he didn't try to reinvent television heroes. Instead, he leaned into a more natural style, one where humor, frustration, and even embarrassment could coexist with heroism. Magnum wasn't indestructible, and that made him human. Selleck credits Garner for showing him that playing a real man on screen could be far more powerful than trying to be a flawless one. But the lessons didn't stop with performance. Garner also modeled integrity. In the entertainment industry, where contracts, royalties, and power struggles often defined relationships, Garner became known as a man who stood up for fairness. His lawsuit against Universal over unpaid profits from the Rockford Files is legendary. Many actors would have stayed silent, fearing retaliation from the studios. Garner refused. He didn't fight for money out of greed. He fought because it was the right thing to do. And he won. For Selleck, who was still finding his way in a cutthroat business, this was invaluable. It showed him that you didn't have to play along with unfair systems just to survive. You could stand your ground and still be respected. Garner taught him that being principled wasn't a weakness in Hollywood. It was a strength. Equally important was Garner's attitude toward fame. Unlike many stars of his era, he didn't chase the spotlight. He wasn't interested in being photographed at every party or making headlines for his personal life. He valued his privacy and protected it fiercely. His marriage to Lois Clark lasted nearly 6 decades, a remarkable achievement in Hollywood. Garner proved that it was possible to be both a major celebrity and a devoted family man. Selleck carried that lesson into his own life. After achieving success with Magnum P.I., he deliberately chose a quieter existence. He bought a ranch in Ventura County where he raised his family away from the constant noise of Hollywood. Like Garner, he placed a premium on balance, prioritizing his personal life even as his career thrived. Then there was humility. Garner's reputation on set was legendary. He treated everyone, from producers to the lowest-ranking crew member, with respect. He never saw himself as more important than the people around him. In fact, he was known for his humor, often using jokes to ease tension and build camaraderie. Selleck noticed how powerful that attitude was. When a star behaves with kindness, it sets the tone for the entire production. Over the years, Selleck developed a similar reputation. Co-stars often describe him as generous, approachable, and professional. That wasn't accidental. It was the direct result of watching Garner and realizing that humility didn't make you smaller. It made you greater. When Tom Selleck reflects on James Garner today, he doesn't talk about acting techniques or specific lines of dialogue. He talks about authenticity, fairness, and humanity. Garner didn't just show him how to succeed in Hollywood. He showed him how to do it without losing yourself. And in an industry where many burn out or compromise their values, that lesson may have been the most important of all. For Tom Selleck, admiration of James Garner wasn't limited to watching from the sidelines. Eventually, fate placed them in the same orbit, and Selleck had the privilege of working alongside the man he had looked up to for years. These collaborations transformed their relationship from one of hero and admirer to one of mutual respect, friendship, and even mentorship. One of their earliest meaningful professional connections came when Selleck made guest appearances in television projects that overlapped with Garner's world. While Selleck was already beginning to make a name for himself with small but notable roles, The Rockford Files stood as a juggernaut of the 1970s. For any actor, stepping into Garner's territory was intimidating. But Selleck found the experience eye-opening. On set, Selleck witnessed something that fans never saw: Garner's work ethic. Despite chronic back pain, injuries that plagued him for much of his career, worsened by years of doing his own stunts, Garner never let discomfort interfere with his performance. He showed up, knew his lines, and delivered with the same charm and ease audiences expected. For a young actor still learning discipline, this was invaluable. Selleck realized that being a star wasn't about charisma alone. It was about consistency, preparation, and resilience. Their interactions on set were warm, even playful. Garner treated Selleck not as a rookie, but as a colleague. He answered questions without condescension, offered advice freely, and never once acted territorial about his place as the established star. This generosity of spirit made a lasting impression on Selleck. Many veteran actors guarded their success jealously, seeing newcomers as competition. Garner, by contrast, welcomed rising talent. Years later, when Magnum P.I. made Selleck a household name in the 1980s, the tables had subtly turned. Selleck was now a leading man in his own right, carrying the pressure of a hit show and the public attention that came with it. But instead of creating rivalry, their careers became parallel success stories. They represented two generations of television icons, each beloved for portraying flawed but likable heroes. Selleck has often spoken about how he leaned on the lessons Garner modeled when navigating the spotlight. For example, when Magnum P.I.'s producers pushed him to take on heavy promotional schedules, Selleck remembered how Garner managed to keep his private life sacred. He followed that example, refusing to sacrifice family for publicity. This balance helped him avoid the burnout that so many other stars of the 1980s experienced. Their respect for one another grew deeper as the years went on. Off-screen, they occasionally crossed paths at events, award shows, or industry gatherings. By then, Selleck wasn't just the eager young actor seeking advice. He was a peer. Garner, true to form, never made Selleck feel lesser, even in their early days. Now, the mutual recognition was clear. They were two men who understood the grind of Hollywood but chose to meet it with humor, dignity, and integrity. Perhaps one of the most poignant aspects of their relationship was how Selleck publicly acknowledged Garner's influence. Many actors avoid admitting how much they've borrowed from others, fearing it might make them seem less original. Selleck, however, openly credited Garner for shaping his career. He often said he modeled his on-set demeanor, his approach to fame, and even aspects of his acting on Garner's example. Rather than diminishing his achievements, this honesty only deepened the respect fans had for Selleck. In return, Garner admired Selleck's success. While Garner was never one to gush publicly, those close to him revealed that he saw Selleck as one of the few modern television stars who carried the same qualities audiences had once loved in him: charm, relatability, and a genuine sense of humanity. The admiration had come full circle. By the time Garner's health began to decline in his later years, Selleck's place in Hollywood was firmly secure. Yet he never forgot the foundation his hero had provided. Their working relationship was brief compared to their long individual careers, but the lessons, laughs, and shared respect built something more enduring than any single project. For Selleck, working alongside James Garner wasn't just a career milestone. It was a personal gift, the chance to learn from, befriend, and ultimately stand shoulder to shoulder with the man who had shaped so much of his journey. As Tom Selleck reached his later years, he found himself reflecting more often on the people who shaped his life and career. Among them, James Garner always stood out, not just as a television legend, not just as a mentor, but as a man who proved that decency and authenticity could thrive in an industry that often rewards the opposite. Garner passed away in 2014 at the age of 86, and Hollywood mourned the loss of one of its most beloved stars. Tributes poured in, celebrating his iconic roles in Maverick, The Rockford Files, and films like The Great Escape and Murphy's Romance. But for Selleck, the loss was personal. He wasn't simply honoring a colleague. He was saying goodbye to the figure who had quietly guided his path for decades. In interviews following Garner's death, Selleck's words were filled with warmth and gratitude. He described Garner as the model for how to be a star without arrogance, how to work hard without complaint, and how to treat others with respect, no matter your status. These weren't platitudes. They were lessons Selleck had lived by, directly inspired by Garner's example. Selleck has admitted that his own reputation as a gentleman actor and someone admired as much for his kindness as for his talent is largely because he tried to emulate Garner's approach. He learned that fame fades, roles come and go, but how you treat people leaves the longest-lasting impression. Even beyond Hollywood, Garner's influence carried weight. Both men shared a deep appreciation for privacy and family. Garner was married to Lois Clark for nearly 58 years, an extraordinary achievement in show business. Selleck, too, has enjoyed a long and stable marriage, prioritizing life on his California ranch over the constant buzz of Hollywood. In this, Selleck saw proof that success didn't have to come at the cost of personal happiness, another gift from Garner's example. The parallels between their careers are also striking. Garner's Rockford Files created a template for a new kind of television hero, charming, witty, flawed, and relatable. A decade later, Selleck's Magnum P.I. carried that spirit forward, redefining what audiences wanted in a leading man. Both shows remain iconic, and both actors are remembered for roles that blurred the line between character and actor, largely because they played versions of themselves, natural, authentic, and believable. As Selleck turned 80, journalists often asked him to reflect on his own career. Time and again, he returned to James Garner. He credited Garner not only with shaping his craft, but also with showing him what kind of man he wanted to be. This wasn't about imitation. It was about inspiration. Garner had given him permission, in a way, to stay true to himself in an industry that often pressures people to compromise. The bond between the two men serves as a reminder of something rare in Hollywood, the passing of a torch built not on rivalry, but on respect. Garner didn't view Selleck as competition. He saw him as a worthy successor to a certain tradition of television hero, and Selleck never saw himself as eclipsing Garner, but rather carrying forward what Garner had begun. Today, fans who watch reruns of The Rockford Files and Magnum P.I. can see the connective tissue between the two shows. The humor, the humanity, the vulnerability, it's no coincidence. It's Garner's legacy, living on through Selleck and the generations of actors who followed. For Tom Selleck, breaking his silence on James Garner wasn't about creating headlines or capitalizing on nostalgia. It was about paying tribute to a man who changed his life. At 80, Selleck's reflections are filled with gratitude, not just for the career he enjoyed, but for the example Garner set. And perhaps the greatest compliment Selleck ever gave Garner is this. When asked how he hoped to be remembered, Selleck didn't point to his roles, his awards, or his fame. Instead, he said he hoped people would say of him what they said of Garner, that he was authentic, fair, and a gentleman to the very end.